Hello and welcome once again to Bible Talk with Bruce and Becky. This will be our final episode in the year 2023. We hope that God has blessed you and your family during the past year and that blessing will continue in 2024 as we all grow closer to the Lord.
Another year older.
Another year older and deeper in debt. Last time we began looking at chapter 12 of Revelation. Two great signs appeared in heaven to the writer John. Notice they are called signs, even great signs, which means they are very important. And also, as has been the case all the way through this book, they are signs or symbols. They are pointing to something else, not literally a woman and a dragon. The first sign was a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She gave birth to a male child, and a great red dragon with great power and authority had led a rebellion in heaven and swept down a third of the stars that seemed to be representing angels. Stars often represent angels in early Christian and late Jewish writings from the first century. She gave birth in chapter 5 to a male child, one who should rule all the nations with a rod of iron. We know from the Psalms that this is talking about Messiah, Jesus. And the woman fled into the wilderness where God protects her for 1,260 days. The famous sign, a time, times, and half a time, usually taken to mean 3.5 years, which is also a time of great tribulation in this book. Well, now we will continue and see what happens to these characters in the rest of the book. Becky, please read chapter 12, 7 through 12.
Now war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. For they loved not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short.
All right, war in heaven. Michael, who is apparently an archangel, a powerful leader of the angels, leads the armies of heaven against the dragon, who is also called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, and the one who continually accuses God's people before God. Satan means the accuser. The clearest example of this in the Old Testament is in the book of
The clearest example of Job.
Yeah. Sorry to startle you there. Job is accused by Satan before God, and God gives Satan permission to harm Job and his family, believing that Job will remain steadfast in his trust in the Lord. Notice that although this is a powerful dragon, he can only do what God permits him to do. One of the major themes of the book of Revelation is that God is in charge, controlling what happens even when the circumstances don't appear that way to us. Satan loses the war in heaven and is cast down to the earth. Historically, reading from this passage, when in history does this take place, Satan being cast out of heaven? Becky?
Well, I know he was on the earth when God created the Garden of Eden.
Yes, he was. He was roaming around the earth in the book of Job. When, according to this passage, is he cast out of heaven?
Well, when there was war in heaven,
Yes, and what had happened just immediately before that?
the devil was after the woman and her child. So he was cast down when the child was triumphant.
That's right.
That's the
After
problem.
Messiah was born, and after he finished his work on the earth, then Satan is cast out of heaven. I think if you asked that on a popular quiz, many people would get it wrong. They would think he was cast out of heaven long before that, based upon what I think is a misreading of a couple of Old Testament passages. One in the prophet Isaiah. Let's go back there, and we'll see what Isaiah seems to say about someone being cast down from heaven. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel.
He's in there somewhere.
I'm getting closer. Isaiah chapter 14. Which is a taunt song. These are found quite often in the Old Testament where the prophet takes up a taunt against an opponent of God. What is a taunt, Becky?
Nanny,
T-A-U-N-T.
nanny, boo, boo.
Na, na, na. It's making fun of somebody because of misfortune that has come upon them. This taunt song is said to be in verse 3 and 4 of chapter 14 of Isaiah. When the Lord has given you rest from your pain and turmoil and the hard service with which you were made to serve, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. The word here could also mean a parable. But does it say this is a taunt against Satan or the devil? No, it says clearly in verse 4, this taunt is against the king of Babylon because he has been cast down from his high position. Becky, let's read this taunt song. And you read, please, 12 through 17.
Okay, you're not going to read this?
Nope.
Oh. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world like a desert, and overthrew its cities, who did not let his prisoners go home?
Okay, the king of Babylon who vaunted himself and said, I have ascended into heaven, I have become like the Most High, which was a common way of speaking by tyrants, especially those who ruled empires in those days. They considered themselves equal to God. Some of them even claimed to be divine. But notice this is the man, it says, who caused nations to tremble, who shook kingdoms. A man, not a spiritual being. The king of Babylon, not the devil. Although the devil may have been involved in some of his evil deeds, he is nowhere addressed or referred to in this passage unless you happen to read John Milton. You remember Brother John? What did he write? What was his great epic poem, Becky?
Uh, Paradise Lost.
Paradise Lost. And in it, he takes from the Latin version of this passage, verse 12,
Beelzebub.
the term Lucifer.
Oh, Lucifer.
Here translated, day star, son of dawn. Lucifer, which means light bearer in Latin. Milton incorporated that as the name of the devil in his great poem, but it only occurs in this passage, and it refers to the king of Babylon.
Well, Babylon symbolically represented all evil.
By the time we get to the book of Revelation, it does, but we're back in Isaiah when the actual nation of Babylon has taken Israel into captivity, or Judah and Benjamin into captivity. It's only later that the king of Babylon becomes a symbol for the evil opponents of God. Here it's a real nation with a real king who has gotten above his raisins, as they might say in hillbilly country. He thinks too highly of himself, and so he is cast down as if from his high place in heaven that he is claimed. And earlier in chapter 14 of Isaiah, the people in Sheol, which is the place of the dead, say, "You're like us now. You were so great in your earthly life, but verse 10, you too have become as weak as we. You have become like us. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol, the sound of your harps. Maggots are laid as a bed beneath you, and worms are your cover. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of the dawn." So that famous and tremendous parable or poetic taunt song is told clearly all the way through chapter 14 of Isaiah to be directed against the actual king of Babylon. And I find no indication there that it's symbolic of the devil. But you can disagree with me. That's happened often before. Sometimes even my dear wife has disagreed with me. Go
Well,
figure. You're
I
going to
do
say,
have a question.
I'm sure.
It troubles me to think that there was warfare in heaven.
Troubles everybody, I think.
So I'm thinking when we get to heaven, that is not going to be the case. And did I know that the evil on the earth is due to sin? What is evil in heaven due to?
As usual, an excellent question by my companion. Uh, what causes evil, whether in heaven or on the earth? What is the root, we might say, fundamental cause of evil, which is rebellion against God?
Yeah, I would say rebellion against God is the cause of evil.
What is at the root of rebellion? What makes it possible?
Free will.
There you go. I knew you did it. Free will. God has given his creatures, at least his sentient creatures, like the angels and us, freedom of choice. Even the devil and those who choose to follow him had freedom of choice. They didn't have to rebel against God, but they chose to. And that remains somewhat of a mystery. However, I think a brief explanation would be God desires that we choose to love and serve Him. And if we don't have the freedom not to love and serve Him, we can't freely choose to be His followers.
But all of that will be null and void eventually, right?
What will be null and void?
Evil.
Evil will be done away with, we'll find in Revelation, but no provision is made for the salvation of the devil and his angels. Only human beings have the choice to be disciples of the Lord. And if I had to speculate on that, I would say it's probably because the devil and his angels were in heaven where they were in the presence of God continually from the time that He created them. And they still refuse to repent. The devil and his angels will be cast into the lake of fire as we get to the end of Revelation. And as I believe it was C.S. Lewis said in one of his writings, the doors of hell are locked from the inside. That is, people who follow the devil and his beasts, as described in the book of Revelation, will never repent, even when they are confined to hell. Well, that's a brief answer, not entirely satisfactory to anyone, but some things we can't figure out in this life.
I just don't want to see any wars in heaven.
That's already passed. But the warning to us is, watch out, the devil is in great anger because he's been cast down to the earth, and so he's going to go after us. Remember, this book is written originally to people facing persecution. The message is persecution may get worse. It may result in some of you being killed, but remain faithful, even to the point of death, and you will receive the crown of life. He's the accuser of our brothers, and he's been thrown down. But look at verse 11 back in Revelation 12. They, that is the accusers of our brothers and sisters, that is our brothers and sisters whom the devil is accusing, they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. This is the great irony of this book of Revelation, is that victory is ours through what appears to be losing. Remember the two witnesses we read about in chapter 11? Killed and thrown out in the street, and the whole world of the followers of the beast rejoiced at that. But they overcame. God raised them up and caught them up to heaven. They overcame by being faithful even to the point of death. So the message of this book all the way through is God will not necessarily keep you from persecution or suffering because of Christ, but He will deliver us through our faithful testimony, even to the point of death. Now, some people don't like to preach that message. I heard a guy on TV about a month ago, a well-known preacher, who said, how could we imagine that God would let His people suffer? So they will be raptured, caught up to free them from suffering. Well, I can imagine that God would let His people suffer. He permitted His Son to willingly and freely offer Himself to terrible suffering and death. But He triumphed through that. And we are called in Revelation to triumph in the same way that the Lamb did, even to the point of death. Most of us in America have not faced that kind of direct persecution, although it may be coming before we know it. But what we do in the face of that is to remain faithful and to keep up our testimony of Christ. Well, I'm going to quit preaching and read the rest of chapter 12 before we quit today. Chapter 12 of Revelation, verse 13. When the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the two wings of the great eagle so she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time. The woman escapes the direct assault of the serpent. We decided, I think, last time that the woman stands for God's people. In the Old Testament, she would be faithful Israel who gave birth to the Messiah. In the New Testament, she is the church. And so she is protected for a time from the serpent by fleeing into the wilderness. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And I'm going to include the last half of that verse in next time in chapter 13. Well, the rest of our offspring seem to be Christians that are still facing suffering and persecution. But looks like we've made our escape, right? No, the woman is protected, which must mean the people of Israel who are faithful to God and who are going to be kept until the time of their conversion. I take that from Romans chapter 8, 9, and 10. We won't take time to read that right now. But the dragon has more things up his sleeve, and he's going to spring his trump cards, not intentionally referring to anybody living or dead, and try to get the people of God to follow him in other ways. And we'll, Lord willing, see that the next time when we turn to chapter 13 and are introduced to some ugly characters. Well, Becky, do you want to add to or ask anything before we go?
Um, that's heavy duty stuff,
Yes, it is.
And a little baffling.
God's ways are sometimes baffling to us.
Yes.
Could be why we need faith.
We need faith.
We need faith.
I just keep thinking about as we face temptation from the devil and persecution from outside and possibly worse persecution as the world grows worse, how do we prepare our children and our grandchildren to be faithful till death?
Good question. I would suggest one way is by our example of being faithful no matter what.
And what does it look like? Does it look like being at church every Sunday, or what does it look like?
Well, one thing I can tell you it looks like is this last book of the Bible, whose main purpose is to prepare us, as it prepared people in the first century, for what may be coming. It'll be ugly, it'll be vicious, it will involve suffering, but we will triumph if we hold fast to our testimony. That's to me what it looks like. Well, I've gone preaching again, but it's time to wrap this up. Thank you, Becky, for your good questions. Thoughtful questions as always. And remember out there, boys and girls of all ages, don't send money.
Happy New Year.
And God bless you.